I woke up in a white room, the kind you see in movies, cold, clinical, and too quiet. My head throbbed, a bandage loosely tied around it, and a faint beeping sound came from the heart monitor next to me. I blinked, pretending to be confused. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes, leaned in and asked, "How are you feeling? Do you remember anything?" I paused, took a deep breath, and shook my head. No, nothing. My voice trembled just enough to make it believable. They believed me. Everyone did. Even my ex-spouse, who stood awkwardly in the corner of the room, stiff as a board. They explained I had amnesia, caused by the stress of the divorce and an unfortunate accident. What they didn't know was, I was faking it. Yes, I chose this. The divorce had broken more than just our family, it had broken me. My kids, who used to cling to me for every little thing, now acted like I was a stranger, and maybe, in their eyes, I was. I had left them in the middle of everything. School events, bedtime stories, movie nights, all of it. So here I was, pretending to forget my life, hoping it would give me a second chance to see how my kids really felt about me, and just maybe a way to fix it. The door opened, and I saw them for the first time in what felt like forever. My two kids. The older one, Emma, stood tall and distant, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Next to her was Jack, my youngest, who fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, stealing glances at me like he wasn't sure I belonged here. "Mom, does it remember us?" Jack's voice was small, unsure. "No, honey, give her some time," my ex-spouse replied, their voice too neutral, too controlled. I wanted to reach out to say something comforting, but I couldn't break character, so instead I looked at them with a blank, confused expression. "Are you my kids?" Emma's jaw tightened. "You don't even know us now?" she snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut through the air. Jack nudged her, whispering, "Don't yell at her, she's sick." Sick. That's what they thought of me. I forced a weak smile. I'm sorry, I wish I remembered you." Emma turned on her heel and walked out without another word. Jack hesitated, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite place. Sadness, maybe? Hope? But he left too, following his sister down the sterile hallway. And just like that, I was alone again. But I wasn't going to stop. I had to see this through. If pretending to forget everything was the only way to start over, then so be it. The silence of the hospital room was unbearable after they left. I sat there, staring at the stark white walls, my heart aching with the weight of what I'd just seen. My own daughter's anger, my son's hesitation. They were strangers to me now, but I'd made myself a stranger to them first. A nurse walked in with a clipboard, her cheerful tone breaking the stillness. "Good news! You're being discharged today. Your family's taking you home." Home. The word felt foreign now, but I forced a smile. "That's great," I murmured, my voice weak. An hour later, I found myself in the back seat of a car, my ex driving silently, Emma and Jack sitting as far from me as possible. Emma stared out the window, headphones in, pretending I didn't exist. Jack, on the other hand, kept glancing at me, his lips pressed tight, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The ride felt endless. When we pulled up to the house, a flood of memories hit me, but I had to push them down. This wasn't the time to break character. "Here we are," my ex said, their tone brisk, almost impatient. They opened the door for me, but there was no warmth in the gesture. I stepped inside, and the house felt different. It was quieter than I remembered, the walls bare, no photos of us as a family anymore, just empty space where love used to live. "This is your room now," Emma said flatly, motioning to the smallest bedroom. She didn't wait for a response before walking off, slamming her door behind her. Jack lingered by the door, fidgeting with his hands. "Do you remember anything? Like it all?" he asked softly. I shook my head, keeping my expression blank. "No, sweetheart. I'm sorry." He nodded, biting his lip, then quickly darted away, leaving me standing there alone. The room was small, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling settling in my chest, like I was unwelcome in my own family. I spent the evening wandering the house, pretending to reacquaint myself with the place. In the living room, there was a stack of mail on the table. I glanced at the top envelope, school permission slips, bills, nothing out of the ordinary. But tucked underneath was a drawing. It was a family portrait, sketched in pencil. Emma, Jack, and their other parent. No me. My chest tightened as I held the paper, tracing the lines with my finger. They really don't think I'm part of this family anymore. Later that night, I sat at the dinner table, determined to start a conversation. "So, what do you kids like to do for fun?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Emma didn't even look up from her plate. "Why do you care?" Jack shifted uncomfortably. "We used to go to the park, but we don't anymore." "Why not?" Emma slammed her fork down. "Why do you think? We didn't have anyone to take us." Her words hit like a slap. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling. "I wish I could remember." "Don't bother," she snapped, standing up and storming off. Jack stayed behind, poking at his food, his face downcast. "She's just mad. Don't take it personally," he whispered before quietly excusing himself too. And once again I was left alone. That night, lying in the small bed in my tiny room, I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I'd hoped this plan would help me reconnect with my kids. But so far, all I'd done was reopen old wounds. But I wasn't giving up. I couldn't. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll try again. Morning came, and with it, a sliver of hope. I woke up early, determined to try again. My heart was heavy, but I pushed down the doubts creeping into my mind. They're hurting, just like I am. I have to earn their trust back. The kitchen was quiet when I stepped in. Emma was seated at the counter, scrolling on her phone, earbuds in. Jack sat across from her, munching on cereal and doodling in the corner of a notebook. Neither of them acknowledged me. "Good morning," I said hesitantly. Emma didn't even look up. Jack mumbled, "Morning," without glancing my way. I decided to focus on Jack first. He seemed easier to reach. Peering over his shoulder, I asked, "What are you drawing?" He tensed, covering the page with his arm. "Nothing." "It doesn't look like nothing," I said softly, trying to smile. "It's just a spaceship," he muttered. "I like spaceships." "That's cool. Did I ever take you to see rocket launches?" Jack's hand froze, his pencil hovering over the page. He shook his head, his voice small. "No, you were always busy." My stomach twisted. Before I could say anything, Emma snorted. "Yeah, busy with important things. Too busy for us." Her words stung, but I kept my tone calm. "Emma, I'm sorry. I really wish I remembered everything so I could make it right." Emma finally looked up, her eyes cold. "You don't need to remember. You just need to stop pretending like you care now." She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the kitchen. Jack sat silently, staring down at his drawing. I didn't push him. Instead, I turned to the stove. "Do you guys usually eat cereal for breakfast?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "Well, maybe I can make pancakes tomorrow," I offered, glancing at him hopefully. He shrugged. "Maybe." It wasn't much, but it was something. I heard voices coming from the living room. A muffled argument. I crept closer, careful not to let them hear me. "She's trying," Jack said. "I think she's really trying." "She's faking it," Emma shot back. "Why now? She didn't care before, so why should she care now?" "Maybe she does. Maybe we should give her a chance." Emma's voice softened, but only slightly. "You don't remember what it was like, Jack. How many times we waited for her to come home and she didn't. How many times we thought maybe this time she'd show up to our school events, but she never did." Jack didn't respond, and I felt my heart sink. Emma's words were like daggers, each one hitting deeper than the last. I'd hurt them in ways I hadn't even realized. That evening, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of talking, I wanted to show them I cared. After dinner, I noticed Emma struggling with her math homework at the dining table. Jack was watching TV, but Emma was furiously erasing numbers, her frustration clear. "Can I help?" I asked cautiously. She glared at me. "No, I've got it." I hesitated but didn't leave. "You're multiplying wrong here," I said gently, pointing to her paper. "I said I've got it," she snapped, slamming her pencil down. Jack looked over, wide-eyed. "Emma?" "It's fine," I interrupted softly. "I'll just sit here in case you change your mind." She stared at me for a moment, then sighed. "Whatever." Minutes passed in silence as she scribbled furiously. Eventually, she muttered, "What's wrong with it?" I leaned closer, keeping my tone light. "See here, you carried the wrong number. Try it like this." Reluctantly, she followed my instructions. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw the right answer appear. "Huh. That's it," I said with a small smile. "Thanks," she mumbled, barely looking at me. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," I said, surprised. Jack poked his head in, holding his drawing. I wanted to show you this." He walked over and handed me the paper. It was the spaceship he'd been working on earlier, but now it was finished. "This is amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. "You think so?" he asked, his voice hopeful. "Absolutely. Maybe someday you'll design a real spaceship." Jack smiled for the first time, a small but genuine smile. "Thanks. Good night, Mom." "Good night, sweetheart," I whispered, my heart swelling. As he left the room, I realized something. This wasn't going to be easy, but it wasn't impossible either. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of determination. Jack's small gesture the night before had given me hope, and I was starting to believe I could slowly chip away at Emma's walls too. I stepped into the kitchen, ready to make good on my promise. Pancake batter was already in the mixing bowl, and I was trying to figure out where the whisk was when Jack wandered in, rubbing his eyes. "You're really making pancakes?" he asked, his voice groggy but curious. "Yep," I said with a smile. "Do you want chocolate chips in yours?" Jack's face lit up for a moment, then he quickly masked it with a shrug. "Sure, I guess." As I flipped pancakes, Jack sat at the counter, watching me. "You used to make these all the time when we were little," he said quietly. "Did I asked, feigning confusion while my heart ached. He nodded. "Yeah. Emma always liked hers with blueberries. I like chocolate chips." I paused, my chest tightening. "Thanks for telling me. I want to make them just the way you like." Emma appeared a few minutes later, her hair tied up messily and her expression guarded. She froze when she saw the stack of pancakes on the table. "What's this?" she asked suspiciously. "Pancakes," I said cheerfully. "Jack told me you like blueberries, so I made some for you." Emma's eyes narrowed. "What, is this some kind of bribe?" "No," I said softly, keeping my tone even. "I just thought it might be nice to have breakfast together." She stared at the plate for a moment, then sighed and sat down. "Whatever." Jack watched her carefully, as if waiting for her to explode. But she didn't. Instead, she poked at the pancakes with her fork before taking a small bite. "These are fine," she muttered, avoiding eye contact. Jack grinned. "They're good, right?" "They're okay," Emma replied, but her tone had softened just slightly. It wasn't much, but it felt like a win. After breakfast, Jack went back to his drawing and Emma retreated to her room. I stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up and reflecting on how far I still had to go. That's when I noticed something on the counter. A sticky note in Emma's handwriting. It said, "Thanks for breakfast." I stared at the note for a long time, my chest tight. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. Later that day, I decided to take a risk. Emma was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her headphones on. I approached cautiously, sitting down a few feet away. "Hey," I said softly. She glanced at me out of the corner of her eye but didn't respond. "I was wondering, would you want to go out with me today? Just the two of us? We could do something you like." Emma snorted. "Why? So you can pretend you care?" Her words hurt, but I didn't let it show. "No," I said calmly. "Because I want to get to know you again." She rolled her eyes. "Pass." "Okay," I said, standing up. "If you change your mind, let me know." I walked away, my heart sinking, but I reminded myself this wasn't going to be easy. Emma had years of hurt built up, and I couldn't undo that overnight. That evening, I noticed Emma sitting on the porch, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked so small and vulnerable, like the little girl I used to know. I grabbed 2 mugs of hot chocolate and stepped outside, offering her one without saying a word. She hesitated but took it, staring into the mug as steam curled up into the cool night air. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves. "Why are you even here?" Emma asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I want to fix things," I said honestly. "I know I messed up before, but I want to try again, if you'll let me." Emma didn't respond right away. She just stared at her mug, her expression unreadable. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly. "I understand," I replied, "but I'm not giving up." For the first time, Emma looked at me, really looked at me. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe doubt, maybe curiosity, maybe a tiny spark of hope. She stood up abruptly, taking her mug with her. "Good night," she said softly before heading inside. "Good night, Emma," I whispered, watching her go. That small moment felt like the start of something. A crack in the wall she'd built around herself. I knew I had a long way to go, but for the first time, it felt like I was moving in the right direction. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter. It was faint, almost hesitant, but it was there. I followed the sound down the hallway and stopped at the living room doorway. Jack was sitting cross-legged on the floor, showing Emma a drawing in his notebook. "It's supposed to be a robot," Jack said, his voice shy. Emma smirked. "It looks like a tin can with arms." "It's a cool tin can," Jack protested, grinning. For a moment, I just stood there, watching them. It had been so long since I'd seen them like this. Light, unguarded, like the weight of the world wasn't crushing them. I didn't want to ruin it, but Jack noticed me first. "Mom," he called, waving me over. Emma's smile disappeared in an instant. She stood up, brushing her hands on her jeans. "I have stuff to do," she mumbled, walking toward the stairs. "Emma, wait," I said, my voice stopping her halfway up. She turned, her face carefully blank. "Jack's robot is really cool," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But I think it's missing something." Jack frowned. "What?" "A name," I said, kneeling next to him. "What's a robot without a name?" Jack's eyes lit up, and he immediately started brainstorming. Emma hesitated at the top of the stairs, watching us for a moment before disappearing into her room. Jack and I spent the rest of the morning creating stories about his robot. He decided to name it Max and gave it a backstory as a superhero saving the world from alien invaders. "I used to tell you stories like this, didn't I?" I asked gently as we worked. Jack nodded, his voice quiet. "You did, but then you stopped." My chest tightened, guilt washing over me. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I should have been there more." Jack looked up at me, his big eyes searching mine. "Are you going to stop again?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm here, Jack, and I'm staying." He smiled, a small, tentative smile, but it was enough to give me hope. Later that afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when Emma appeared, her arms crossed. "Jack said you're helping him with some robot thing," she said, her tone skeptical. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice casual. "Do you want to see it?" Emma rolled her eyes. "No, thanks. I'm not 5. "Fair enough," I said with a small smile. "But if you ever change your mind, you're welcome to join us." She hesitated for a moment before sitting down on the arm of the couch. "Do you even know what he likes, or are you just guessing?" "I'm learning," I said honestly. "I want to learn what you both like." Emma raised an eyebrow. "You're trying really hard, huh?" "Yes," I said softly. She didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. Instead, she started flipping through a magazine on the coffee table, her presence oddly comforting. That evening, I decided to make dinner for everyone, a proper, sit-down meal. Jack was excited, offering to set the table and even asking if he could help stir the pasta sauce. Emma, on the other hand, stayed in her room, only coming down when I called her for dinner. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the table suspiciously. "Spaghetti," I said, setting the last plate down. "I thought we could eat together tonight." Emma looked at Jack, who was already digging in, then back at me. "You didn't use jar sauce, did you?" I chuckled. "Nope. It's homemade." She sat down, still looking skeptical, but took a bite. Her expression didn't change, but she didn't complain either. "It's good," Jack said with his mouth full. "Thanks, buddy," I said, smiling. Emma didn't say anything, but she didn't leave the table. That alone felt like progress. After dinner, as I was washing the dishes, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You made that from scratch?" she asked, leaning against the frame. "Yep," I said, glancing at her. "Did you like it?" She shrugged. "It was okay." I smiled. "I'll take okay as a win." Emma rolled her eyes but didn't leave. Instead, she grabbed a towel and started drying the dishes without a word. "Thanks," I said softly. "Don't make it a big deal," she muttered, but her lips twitched like she was fighting a smile. For the first time, it felt like she was letting me in. Just a little. The next day started like any other, but I could feel a shift in the air. It was subtle. Jack humming while sketching his robot, Emma lingering in the living room a little longer than usual. But just as I thought things were improving, the cracks beneath the surface started to show. It began during lunch. Jack was excitedly talking about his latest robot story, while I served sandwiches. "And then Max saves the astronaut," Jack said, grinning. "That's a great twist," I said, smiling. Emma rolled her eyes. "Can we not talk about robots for once?" Jack's smile faltered. "I was just telling a story. It's all you ever talk about," Emma snapped. "And now she's acting like she cares." "Emma," I started, but she cut me off. "No, you don't get to act like everything's fine now," she shouted, standing up. You weren't here when we needed you. You don't get to waltz back in and pretend like none of it happened. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Jack shrank into his chair, his wide eyes darting between us. You're right, I said softly, keeping my voice steady. I wasn't there, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to make it better now. Emma scoffed. Sorry doesn't fix anything. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door to her room upstairs. I sat at the table, staring at her empty chair, my heart heavy. Jack reached over and touched my hand gently. She didn't mean it, he said quietly. Yes, she did, I replied, forcing a small smile. And she's allowed to feel that way. Jack looked down at his plate. I think she's just scared. Scared of what? That you'll leave again, he whispered. The weight of his words pressed down on me, but they gave me a glimpse into Emma's walls, a mix of anger, hurt, and fear. Later that evening, I knocked on Emma's door. What? She called out, her voice sharp. Can I come in? There was a long pause before she finally said, Fine. I stepped inside. Her room was a mix of chaos and order. Clothes scattered across the floor, but her desk was meticulously organized. She was sitting on her bed, arms crossed, glaring at me. What do you want? To talk, I said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. She rolled her eyes. What's there to talk about? You weren't there, and now you're pretending like you care. I'm not pretending, I said softly. Emma snorted. Sure. You didn't care when you missed my dance recital, or when Jack had to stay home sick because you didn't show up to pick him up from school. You didn't care then. Tears pricked my eyes, but I held them back. You're right. I let you down, and I can't take that back. But I care now, Emma, and I'm trying to be better. Her voice cracked as she said, You don't get to just show up and act like everything's okay. I reached out, placing a hand on hers. I know I hurt you. I know it's going to take time for you to trust me again, but I'm not going anywhere. I promise you that. Emma stared at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You always made promises you didn't keep. I swallowed hard. I know. But this time is different. I'll prove it to you, even if it takes the rest of my life. For a moment, she said nothing, just staring at me like she was searching for the truth in my words. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Later that night, as I was cleaning up in the kitchen, Emma walked in. Can I have some tea? She asked hesitantly. Of course, I said, hiding my surprise. As I poured her a cup, she leaned against the counter, her posture less guarded than usual. I didn't mean to yell earlier, she muttered. It's okay, I said. You have every right to be upset. She nodded, taking a sip of her tea. Jack really likes you, you know. He's just scared too. I looked at her, my heart swelling. I know. I'm scared too. I don't want to mess this up again. Emma didn't respond, but the fact that she stayed there, drinking tea with me in the quiet kitchen, felt like a small victory. The next morning felt different. For the first time, the house didn't feel as heavy. Jack was in the living room drawing again, humming to himself, and Emma sat nearby with her headphones on, pretending to ignore him, but occasionally sneaking glances at his work. I decided to take advantage of the small progress we'd made and suggested an outing. Why don't we go to the park today? I asked over breakfast. We could pack a picnic, spend some time outside. It might be nice to get some fresh air. Jack's face lit up. Can we bring Max? He asked, holding up his robot drawing. Of course, I said, smiling. Emma, however, frowned. I have homework, she said, her tone clipped. You can bring it with you, I offered gently. Or we can make it a short trip. She sighed, looking at Jack's eager expression. Fine, but I'm not staying long. The air was crisp and cool, and the park was bustling with activity. Kids playing on the swings, joggers on the paths, families spread out on picnic blankets. We found a quiet spot under a tree, and Jack immediately began sketching his robot in action, narrating its adventures. Emma sat with her notebook open, half-heartedly scribbling something, but mostly glancing around at the other people. I sat back, watching them, letting them lead the moment. Jack ran up to me, holding his notebook. Mom, look, Max saved the astronaut again. That's amazing, Jack, I said, genuinely impressed. You've got such a vivid imagination. Thanks, he said, beaming before darting back to his spot under the tree. I noticed Emma watching us out of the corner of her eye. You used to love the park, I said softly, sitting down next to her. I remember taking you here when you were little. you'd run straight to the swings. Emma didn't look at me. Yeah, well, that was a long time ago. I know, I said, but it doesn't mean we can't make new memories now. She finally turned to me, her expression skeptical. You really think you can just fix everything? No, I admitted, but I think we can start over. Even if it's just little steps. Emma stared at me for a moment before sighing. Jack's having fun, at least. And what about you? I asked gently. She shrugged, but I caught a faint smile tugging at her lips. It's okay, I guess. As the afternoon went on, Jack convinced me to help him build a fort out of fallen branches and leaves. Emma rolled her eyes, but eventually joined in, offering sarcastic critiques about our engineering skills. This is the worst fort I've ever seen, she said, laughing as Jack and I struggled to prop up a particularly stubborn branch. Then help us make it better, Jack challenged. With a dramatic sigh, Emma crouched down and started rearranging the branches. Before long, all three of us were laughing and working together, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were a family again. As the sun began to set, we packed up our things and started walking back to the car. Jack ran ahead, chasing a butterfly, leaving Emma and me walking side by side. Today was nice, she said quietly, breaking the silence. I'm glad you think so, I replied, keeping my tone light. She hesitated, then added, Jack's been happier lately, since you've been around. And you? I asked carefully. Emma glanced at me, her expression conflicted. I don't know yet, but you're trying. I can see that. I smiled, a lump forming in my throat. Thank you, Emma. That means a lot. She nodded, then hurried ahead to catch up with Jack, leaving me standing there, watching my two kids walk together under the fading sunlight. That night, as I tucked Jack into bed, he grabbed my hand. Mom, are you staying forever this time? Yes, I said firmly, squeezing his hand. I promise, Jack, I'm not going anywhere. He smiled sleepily and whispered, Good night, Mom. When I stepped out of his room, I found Emma leaning against the wall. You were always better at tucking him in than I was, she said, her voice softer than usual. I think he just likes knowing we're here, I replied. Emma nodded, her gaze distant. Good night, she said, heading to her room without another word. Good night, Emma, I whispered, my heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. The next morning, I woke up feeling a mix of hope and determination. Each day brought tiny shifts, Jack's openness, Emma's fleeting smiles, but I knew I hadn't truly earned their trust yet. The wounds I had left behind were deep, and healing them would take more than a few kind words or shared moments. But something in Emma's gaze last night gave me hope. A flicker of understanding, maybe even the faintest sign of forgiveness. I decided it was time to take the next step. While Jack was at school, I knocked on Emma's door. She opened it, clearly annoyed, her headphones slung around her neck. What? She asked, her tone flat. I wanted to ask if you'd come with me somewhere, I said hesitantly. She folded her arms. Why? Because I think it's something you'll like, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's a surprise. Emma sighed dramatically, but grabbed her jacket. Fine, but if this is some lame bonding thing, I'm leaving. I couldn't help but smile. Deal. I drove us to an art supply store, a place Emma used to love visiting when she was younger. Her eyes lit up the moment we stepped inside, though she quickly masked it with indifference. What are we doing here? She asked, trailing behind me. I thought maybe you'd like to pick out some new supplies, I said. You used to love drawing. Emma raised an eyebrow. That was a long time ago. It doesn't have to be, I said gently. She wandered the aisles, her fingers brushing over the pencils, sketchbooks, and paints. Finally, she picked up a small set of charcoal pencils. These are cool, I guess, she said, trying to sound unimpressed. They're yours, I said, grabbing a sketchbook to go with them. Emma hesitated. You don't have to buy me stuff, you know. That's not going to fix everything. I know, I said softly, but I want to support the things that make you happy. She looked at me for a moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded. That evening, after dinner, Emma stayed at the table while Jack ran off to play. She pulled out her new sketchbook and started drawing, her movements hesitant at first, but gradually becoming more confident. What are you working on? I asked, sitting down across from her. She hesitated, then turned the sketchbook toward me. It was a rough sketch of the park we'd visited the day before, with Jack chasing the butterfly and me sitting under the tree. It's beautiful, I said, my voice full of awe. It's not done, she mumbled, her cheeks flushing slightly. I'd love to see it when it is, I said, smiling. Emma didn't respond, but she didn't push me away either. Later, Jack burst into the room, holding his latest drawing of Max the robot. Look, Mom, Max has a new friend now. He handed me the paper, which showed Max standing next to another robot labeled Emma Bot. Emma Bot? I asked, laughing. Yeah, Jack said, grinning. She's super smart and helps Max fix spaceships. Emma rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. Great, I'm a robot now. You're the best robot, Jack said, his enthusiasm contagious. I looked at both of them, my heart swelling. For the first time, it felt like we were all on the same page. Laughing, sharing, being. That night, as we sat in the living room, Emma spoke up. Why did you really leave? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. I thought I was doing the right thing, I said slowly. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough to be what you needed, and instead of trying harder, I ran. It was the worst decision I ever made. Emma's eyes narrowed. You just gave up? Yes, I admitted, my voice breaking. I was selfish, and I hurt you both, but I'm here now, and I'm not giving up again. Emma looked down at her hands, her expression conflicted. It's not that easy, you know. You can't just fix everything. I know, I said softly, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. She didn't respond right away, but after a long pause she nodded slightly. Before heading to bed, Emma stopped by my room. Thanks for today, she said awkwardly, standing in the doorway. For the art supplies? I asked. She shrugged. For everything. I smiled, my chest tight with emotion. You're welcome, Emma. Good night, she said, disappearing down the hallway before I could say more. I sat on my bed, staring at the door she'd just walked through. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic reconciliation, but it felt like the walls she'd built were finally starting to come down. Next morning felt lighter, as if the tension that had hung over the house for weeks was finally starting to dissipate. Jack was already at the table, building a spaceship out of leftover cereal boxes and tape, while Emma sat nearby, sketching quietly. I joined them with a mug of coffee, watching as Jack narrated his spaceship adventures, and Emma absent-mindedly nodded along. For the first time in what felt like forever, the three of us were in the same space without the usual walls between us. I suggested we spend the day together. No errands, no distractions, just the three of us. What are we even supposed to do? Emma asked skeptically. Anything you want, I said. It's your day to decide. Jack's hand shot up. We should go to the arcade. Emma rolled her eyes but smirked. You just want to play that robot game again? Yeah, because it's awesome, Jack said, grinning. Emma shrugged. Fine, but I'm not carrying his tickets this time. We laughed, and just like that, we had our plan. The arcade was loud and chaotic, but the kids were in their element. Jack darted from game to game, collecting tickets like his life depended on it. Emma played it cool, pretending she didn't care, but I caught her smiling when she landed a high score on the basketball machine. Look, Mom, Jack shouted, waving a handful of tickets. I'm gonna win the giant teddy bear, I laughed. You'll need a lot more tickets for that. I can do it, he said confidently, dragging me toward another game. For a moment I turned to Emma, who was leaning against a nearby game console. You're good at this, I said, gesturing toward the scoreboard. She shrugged. I guess. I used to be terrible at these, I said with a chuckle. You always beat me when you were little. Emma's lips twitched into a faint smile. Yeah, I remember. It was a small moment, but it felt like progress. At the prize counter, Jack proudly handed over his tickets and picked out a small stuffed robot. He turned to me, holding it out. This is for you, Mom, he said. Me? I asked, surprised. Yeah, Jack said, grinning. You like robots too now, right? I felt tears prick my eyes as I took the stuffed toy. Thank you, sweetheart. I love it. Emma rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. He's such a dork, she muttered, but there was warmth in her voice. That night after dinner, we all sat in the living room. Jack was building yet another robot out of blocks, while Emma sketched in her notebook. I sat with a book, content just to be near them. Can I show you something? Emma asked suddenly, her voice hesitant. Of course, I said, setting my book aside. She handed me her sketchbook, flipping to a page near the middle. It was a detailed drawing of the three of us at the park. Jack chasing a butterfly, me sitting under the tree, and Emma leaning against the trunk. It's beautiful, I said softly, running my fingers over the page. It's not done, she said quickly. I still love it, I said, smiling. Thank you for showing me. Emma shrugged, but her cheeks flushed. Whatever. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned serious. Why did you decide to stay this time? Emma asked, her tone softer than before. Because I realized how much I lost when I left, I said honestly. You and Jack mean everything to me. I should have been there, and I wasn't. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Jack looked up from his robot, his big eyes shining. Even when we mess up? Even then, I said firmly. Emma hesitated, then asked, What if we can't forgive you? Then I'll keep trying, I said, for as long as it takes. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Then Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. As I tucked Jack into bed that night, he hugged me tightly. I'm glad you stayed, Mom, he whispered. I am too, I said, my heart full. When I stepped out of his room, Emma was waiting in the hallway. You really mean it, don't you? She asked quietly. Every word, I said. She nodded, then surprised me by pulling me into a quick hug. Good night, Mom, she said, walking to her room before I could respond. Good night, Emma, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. That night, for the first time in years, I felt like we were truly a family again. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but we were rebuilding something stronger, something real.